How's it going, folks? Welcome back to another alternate history scenario. The focus of this video today is the nation of Burkina Faso, a small nation with a rich history located in West Africa. Without further ado, let's get into it. Burkina Faso is a nation that has long been relegated to the sidelines of both geopolitical discussion and the shared cultural memory of the world, something which I feel is a grave mistake. I think a major reason for this is the fact that the nation of Burkina Faso has had a very depressing and tragic history, and not even the memeable kind of tragic history like with Poland. With the earliest date of human settlement dating back as far as 14,000 years ago, the land we now call Burkina Faso has been shaped by countless waves of migration of various ethnic groups to the region, in which tribes, kingdoms, and empires all rose and fell throughout prehistory and ancient times. By the 11th century AD, the Mossi people, who today comprise roughly half of Burkina Faso's population, had formed numerous powerful kingdoms in what is today Burkina Faso, often referred to as the Mossi Empire. It was shortly after the founding of the empire that the city of Ouagadougou was founded, which soon became the empire's capital city and remains the capital city of Burkina Faso today. For over 700 years, the Mossi Empire ruled the land of what is today Burkina Faso, with successive emperors further centralizing governmental power, growing the nation's military and economic might, as well as fighting off several attempted invasions by other West African powers. However, no empire lasts forever. During the scramble for Africa, France invaded the Mossi Empire, quickly defeating the empire's constituent kingdoms. The capital of Ouagadougou was burned to the ground, and the last ruler, Wobogo, was forced to flee after his remaining forces surrendered. In the blink of an eye, the centuries-old empire was destroyed in less than a year. The remnants of the empire were absorbed into French West Africa as the colony of Upper Volta. The new colony retained the old borders of the fallen empire, as well as many of the empire's native administrators to run the colony for the French. The colonial state was one designed to exploit the natives, imposing discriminatory laws upon them and giving privileges to the French colonists who settled there. After decades of colonial rule, amidst the wave of decolonization sweeping the world in the mid 20th century, France granted the Upper Volta colony independence in 1960 as the Republic of Upper Volta. However, the end of colonialism did not mean the end of strife in the region. Before independence had even been granted on August 5, 1960, the president-elect of Upper Volta, Maurice Yamego, had managed to crush the political opposition. From day one, Upper Volta was a one-party state under a corrupt dictatorship backed by France. After years of tyranny, economic downturn, and virulent corruption, Yamego's regime was overthrown on January 3, 1966, following a popular uprising against him and a military coup d'etat. Although the new Upper Voltese military dictatorship stated that they would return power to a civilian government by the year 1970, it would go on to last for the next 14 years. After years of military dictatorship, as well as growing desertification and drought threatening the nation's food supply, the military dictatorship was itself overthrown in a 1980 military coup that established a new military government which was itself overthrown in 1982 by another military coup that appointed Jean-Baptiste Ouedraogo, an obscure compromise candidate, to be the next Upper Voltese president. Ouedraogo's co-conspirators in the coup included a group known as the Communist Officers Group, comprised of radical communist figures within the Upper Voltese military, led by a young soldier with revolutionary ideals named Captain Thomas Sankara. Sankara, who hailed from a well-to-do family, had pursued education from a young age. When he reached adulthood, he joined the military of the newly independent Republic of Upper Volta, where he was exposed to numerous new political philosophies, as well as the extent of corruption and instability that plagued the Republic. These events would profoundly shape the young Sankara. As Ouedraogo's unpopular government floundered in the wake of the 1982 coup, Captain Sankara was elected prime minister by Ouedraogo's military junta in January 1983 to provide a counterbalance to Ouedraogo. This, however, did nothing to help the state of the government. Tensions between the center-right Ouedraogo and the far-left Sankara only worsened following Sankara's rise to public fame and his transformation into an immensely popular political figure across the nation, all while Ouedraogo's popularity cratered. Following the advice of the French, Ouedraogo launched a purge of all anti-French and left-wing elements in his government on the 16th of May, 1983. Prime Minister Sankara and many of his political allies were arrested and thrown in prison. The decision to arrest Sankara cost the government what remained of its credibility, and generated sufficient political momentum to cause an all-out revolution. Following months of political volatility, Captain Sankara was released from prison after significant military pressure was exerted on Ouedraogo's government. Following reports that Sankara and other leftist military figures would soon be killed by government agents, on August 4, 1983, communists in the Upper Voltese military launched a coup against the Ouedraogo regime. 250 paratroopers marched on Ouagadougou, seizing key points across the city, all while being aided by the city's civilians. By the end of the day, the military had seized control of the nation, and Captain Sankara became the fifth president of the Republic of Upper Volta. Captain Sankara moved quickly in the aftermath of the coup, establishing a new governing body, the National Council of the Revolution, to serve as Upper Volta's new government. Captain Sankara stated that the purpose of the coup was to transfer national power from the Upper Voltese bourgeoisie to the hands of the people of Upper Volta. The National Council of the Revolution was meant to liquidate imperialist domination over the country, aided by Cuban-style committees for the defense of the revolution. Ouagadougou airport was closed, a curfew was put in place, and the nation's borders were sealed. Burkina Faso was on the road to becoming a communist nation. On the first anniversary of the coup, the Republic of Upper Volta was renamed to Burkina Faso, meaning the land of upright people in the Mossi language. The 1983 Upper Voltese coup d'etat was retroactively renamed the Burkinabe Revolution. The Burkinabe Revolution ushered in an era of drastic change for Burkina Faso. Following the revolution, Burkina Faso enjoyed renewed warm relations with the Soviet Union, Libya, Ghana, and Albania. Concurrently, relations with France became frosty, as the French disapproved of the path their former colony had taken. In the context of the Cold War, Sankara's unabashedly communist government also made him an enemy of the United States of America. The days following the revolution saw the nation reorganized into 30 provinces, a purge of the government bureaucracy and military, and the crushing of an attempted counter-coup by surviving anti-communist elements within the military. The stated aims of the Burkinabe Revolution were to crush imperialism in Burkina Faso, end corruption, improve women's rights, improve environmental protections, and make a full education and free healthcare accessible to all Burkinabe citizens. During his tenure, Captain Sankara launched programs to improve literacy and school attendance rates, increase representation of women in government, ameliorate infant mortality, and begin reforestation. Throughout Sankara's time in power, economic difficulties engendered popular opposition and disagreement within his government, as did conservatives' objections to his progressive platform. From 1983 onwards, Burkina Faso, under the authoritarian government of Captain Sankara, achieved many successes. These included the abolition of tribal leadership privileges, land redistribution that saw land seized from feudal lords and given to the peasants, a mass vaccination campaign, the construction of vital infrastructure such as schools, hospitals, and reservoirs, the outlawing of FGM and forced marriages, and the planting of 10 million trees nationwide to combat desertification. At the same time, austerity measures implemented by the Sankara government were met with a lukewarm reception. Revolutionary committees imprisoned many accused of being counter-revolutionaries and also engaged in extrajudicial killings. Sankara's reforms also negatively impacted the powerful former ruling elite as well as French and other foreign interests in the country. Likewise, despite enjoying warm relations with communist and non-aligned nations, Sankara's government had very few friends in the other nations of West Africa. Côte d'Ivoire in particular became very hostile to communist Burkina Faso. In the years following the revolution, Thomas Sankara remained an authoritarian leader who enjoyed popular support from his citizenry. His programs had been implemented with great success, and yet this state of affairs was not to last. During his time in power, Sankara had always had his close friend, Blaise Compaore, by his side. Under Sankara, Compaoré, who had been a major figure in the Burkinabe Revolution, had effectively become the second most powerful individual in Burkina Faso. However, the immense success the men had achieved was simply not enough for Compaoré. He coveted the presidency for himself, and the end result of Compaoré's greed and short-sightedness was disaster. After 4 years in power, the year 1987 saw the end of the Sankara era for good. On October 15, 1987, Captain Blaise Compaore betrayed Thomas Sankara, his once close friend, and launched a coup d'etat against his government with foreign support. Sankara, along with 12 of his closest government associates, was murdered at a governmental meeting in Ouagadougou by soldiers sent by Compaoré. Sankara himself was shot in the back numerous times and his body was riddled with bullets. Almost every other attendee was also killed. Sankara was quickly buried in an unmarked grave as his family fled for their lives. The 1987 coup saw the end of the Burkinabe Revolution. The same day Sankara was murdered on his orders, Blaise Compaore seized power, becoming the second president of Burkina Faso. Claiming he had overthrown Sankara to improve deteriorating relations with France and Côte d'Ivoire, Compaoré dedicated his first days in power to destroying Sankara's legacy. Nearly all of Sankara's reforms were overturned, setting the nation on the path to ruin. Compaoré ruled as the nation's dictator for decades, overseeing a period of immense political instability, with numerous failed coups against the unpopular leader and economic stagnation that resulted in Burkina Faso remaining one of the least developed countries in the world. Compaoré's disastrous rule over Burkina Faso only ended in 2014, when he was overthrown in a revolution after attempting to further prolong his time in office. Compaoré's overthrow left a power vacuum in its wake, with numerous civilian and military governments forming and collapsing in Burkina Faso in the years since. In 2022, the Burkinabe government was overthrown in another military coup, which established a military junta that still governs the nation as of 2024. Today, Burkina Faso is a nation racked by food and water insecurity and underdeveloped infrastructure. Since 2015, the Burkinabe government has been at war with jihadist insurgents, a conflict which has killed 10,000 people and displaced 2 million nationwide. Burkina Faso really did get the worst possible ending for their nation. Although hope remains that someday the nation may find peace with its new junta, the potential of the Burkinabe Revolution was squandered by the greed of a few individuals. But what if history had gone differently? What if Thomas Sankara was never betrayed by Blaise Compaore? Let's find out. Our point of divergence begins in spring 1987. This scenario is very straightforward, as by this point President Sankara had already seized power and enacted his reforms. The natural next step was simply to cement his reforms and complete the Burkinabe Revolution. For our point of divergence here, we will only have to change one thing, the character of Blaise Compaore, that is, his moral character. This is because Compaore's betrayal was the key facet to Sankara's downfall. Compaoré was the second most powerful individual in Burkina Faso at the time, and if he had not been leading the coup, overthrowing Sankara with a little-known military figure would have proved to be so improbable that the risk of failure would have outweighed the opportunities of success. In this alternate timeline, Compaoré is approached by shadowy representatives from France, Côte d'Ivoire, and Liberia, much like many theorize he was in our timeline. When Compaoré receives a monetary offer to lead a coup d'etat against his friend, he instead reflects on how much his homeland had improved since the Burkinabe Revolution. Is it really worth throwing away the entire future of your country for money and power when you are already the second most powerful person in the country? In this timeline, Compaoré decides it isn't. On April 14, 1987, backdoor channels between Compaoré and the French collapse after Compaoré declines to respond to French demands to overthrow Sankara. On April 15, 1987, as Compaoré leaves his residence to attend a meeting with Sankara in Ouagadougou to inform him of the conspiracy against him, he is killed in a fiery explosion after a car bomb planted under his government-issued Renault 5 explodes, killing both him and his driver. The news of Compaoré's death shocks the nation of Burkina Faso, with President Sankara himself distraught at the death of his good friend and comrade in arms. On April 16th, a heartbroken yet stoic Sankara gives a speech at the Place de la Révolution in downtown Ouagadougou. Sankara, although known for his reputation as a leader who disregarded his own security to better connect with the citizens of his nation, is today flanked by numerous bodyguards, along with a security perimeter established around the site of the speech. President Sankara delivers an emotional speech, eulogizing the late Compaoré as a revolutionary martyr and true son of Burkina Faso. Sankara vows to get to the bottom of Compaoré's senseless murder, and declares that despite the current atmosphere of fear permeating the nation in the aftermath of Compaoré's assassination, he will never stop fighting for the Burkinabe people. On April 20th, 1987, a massive funeral procession for Blaise Compaoré is held in Ouagadougou's main thoroughfare, ending in a small patch of land the government had set aside for future development into a mausoleum for Burkina Faso's revolutionaries and martyrs. Compaoré was the first of many to be laid to rest there. It was said that in private, in the days following his friend's death, Captain Sankara was inconsolable. This drastic change to Burkina Faso's timeline had set a variety of new events into motion. Following Compaoré's murder, which investigators later determined to have been committed by French agents, President Sankara's regime put new emphasis on the security of Burkinabe society, and by the late 1980s, Burkina Faso had taken the first steps towards becoming a national security state. In 1989, taking inspiration from previous revolutionary movements in China and the Soviet Union, President Thomas Sankara announces the launch of a second and final revolution to permanently reorientate Burkinabe society towards the path of socialism. Persecution of figures within the traditional tribal governments of Burkina Faso intensifies, as well as the persecution of the former ruling class and religious leaders who refused to toe the government line. Many of these figures were branded as enemies of the revolution. Some were sent to labor camps, others were sentenced to death by the revolutionary committees, whose power skyrocketed in the aftermath of Compaoré's assassination, driven by President Sankara's desire to ensure Burkina Faso's revolution was built on a strong foundation, rather than resting on the shoulders of one man, himself, alone. Furthermore, Burkina Faso also adopted the practice of holding struggle sessions, where class enemies were humiliated and forced to renounce themselves and declare their loyalty to the state. In response to these developments, on June 1st, 1989, French President François Mitterrand and American President George Bush issue a joint statement denouncing President Sankara's, quote, tyrannical communist regime which has only brought suffering to the innocent people of Burkina Faso, who yearn to break free from the horrific rule of President Sankara, end quote. Following the joint statement, France breaks off relations with Burkina Faso and expels the Burkinabe ambassador to France, with Burkina Faso doing the same one day later. The United States of America also issues further economic sanctions against Burkina Faso in retaliation for the actions of Sankara's government. For Burkina Faso, the end of the 1980s and early 1990s were a time of rapid social change, along with the rise of an infrastructure boom brought on by a massive increase of trade and aid to Burkina Faso by the ailing USSR. The events of the world as a whole remained completely unchanged, at least nearly completely unchanged, and the 1990s would see Burkina Faso quietly continue its development and rise out of poverty as a spectator to the end of the Cold War. With the collapse of the USSR, Burkina Faso would be left without its biggest ally. Although times would be tough, the socialist state in Burkina Faso would be able to endure without Soviet support. Throughout the 1990s, Burkina Faso would only appear in Western media when Sankara would denounce the US's actions in the Gulf War, praise the 1991 Soviet coup attempt, or denounce the NATO intervention in Yugoslavia. With the fall of communism in Europe and Central Asia, President Sankara was left with few allies in his government's fight to hold off the external forces that constantly sought to push his nation to the breaking point. By 1995, the nation's main allies were Cuba, North Korea, the rump government of Yugoslavia, Libya, Vietnam, and Laos. 1996 would see a landmark 40 million trees planted across the nation as President Sankara, now in his 13th year in power, continued forward with his plans for Burkina Faso, undaunted by external events. Other notable achievements included the introduction of economic plans to guide the nation through the periods of stagnation that occurred as the nation's planned economy weathered the tumultuous international currents of the 1990s. The key to Burkina Faso's survival as an isolated socialist state during this time would be the self-sufficiency of its agricultural sector and lack of government debt due to the government refusing to recognize the previous debts held by the Republic of Upper Volta. By 1999, the previous hierarchical systems that had governed Burkina Faso in the past had all been washed away and lost to time. All that was left now was the Burkinabe state, which, at least according to official government media, served only to benefit the people of Burkina Faso. Despite Sankara's own efforts to prevent it, by the late 1990s an intense cult of personality had been created surrounding him and his family. The 2000s would see new opportunities and new challenges for the nation of Burkina Faso. The rise of the pink tide in South America, especially the rise of Hugo Chavez in Venezuela, would give much needed relief for Burkina Faso as trade relations normalized between the Burkinabe state and the nations of South America. 2001 would mark a rare moment of solidarity between Burkina Faso and the West, following the 9/11 attacks in New York City, which the Burkinabe government condemned. However, by 2003, Burkina Faso and the West had returned to their previous state of acrimonious relations following the United States invasion of Iraq, which Sankara, in an address to the United Nations, described as an act of sheer madness that will only serve to kill millions of innocents and destabilize Western Asia, all in pursuit of neo-colonial greed. The beginning of the Arab Spring and the overthrow of Muammar Gaddafi, one of Burkina Faso's firmest allies, would again reaffirm the frosty relationship between Burkina Faso and the West. By 2012, Burkina Faso, still under the rule of Thomas Sankara, now 62 years old, leads West Africa in literacy rates, lack of press freedom, low infant mortality rates, low corruption rates, economic stagnation, and life expectancy. Even with these shortcomings, Burkina Faso under Sankara's dictatorship is worlds better than Burkina Faso under Compaoré's dictatorship. On August 4, 2013, massive celebrations are held across Burkina Faso in celebration of the Burkinabe Revolution's 30th anniversary. President Sankara, although still very much alive and in good health for a man of his age, had long since been immortalized as the embodiment of Burkina Faso's revolution and the hopes and dreams of its people. Statues of him adorned every major city in the country, and his picture found a place in nearly every home in the nation. 2015 would be a year of transformation for Burkina Faso and its role within the international community. On May 6, 2015, Several Burkinabe policemen were slain in the western Kenedougou province, heralding the start of a jihadist insurgency in Burkina Faso aiming to topple the government of Thomas Sankara and establish an Islamic theocracy allied with ISIS and Al Qaeda. A few months later, on July 11, 2015, the Obama administration reaches out to the Sankara regime. Following efforts to begin a thaw in relations with Cuba, President Obama wished to do the same with Burkina Faso and seek rapprochement with Sankara's government. In light of the war against the jihadist insurgents and eager to rejoin the international economy and have the nation's crippling sanctions lifted, President Sankara accepts the American overtures. On October 15, 2015, President Sankara makes a landmark visit to Washington, D.C. to meet with President Obama and discuss the future of relations between their two countries. Following similar efforts by France in winter 2015, Burkina Faso formally normalizes relations with the USA and France by spring 2016, eventually resulting in the lifting of economic sanctions on May 3, 2016. American President Obama is successfully able to spin the normalization of relations with the communist nation as an integral step to combating terrorism in West Africa. Summer 2016 would see Burkina Faso enter into security agreements with neighboring Mali and Niger to combat the jihadist insurgency in the Sahel region. In 2018, following growing tension between France, Mali, and Niger, French troops would be expelled from Mali and Niger, soon to be replaced by elite Burkinabe forces. On February 20, 2020, President Sankara would officially declare victory over jihadist forces in the Sahel region. By spring 2024, Burkina Faso would still be led by 74-year-old President Sankara, who had yet to show any signs of slowing down with age. Enjoying the benefits of the anti-desertification efforts begun 40 years prior, along with free healthcare and other social benefits, Burkina Faso, despite its authoritarian government, had reached perhaps the best ending it could ever hope for: stability. On August 4, 2024, Burkina Faso celebrated the 41st anniversary of its revolution, with the celebrations headed by an elderly Sankara. As Sankara delivers his famed annual speech in remembrance of the revolution, in his mind he drifts back to the now distant memories of a time when the Burkinabe Revolution was merely an idea in his head. As all of Ouagadougou celebrated their revolution, in a quiet corner of the city lay the mausoleum of the revolution, long since completed and replete with symbolic communist architecture. In the center of the mausoleum stood a statue of a young soldier with his fist raised in the air. At the base of the statue lay an inscription. This statue commemorates the memory of Blaise Compaore, son of Burkina Faso, hero of the revolution, and brother in arms to all who knew him. May he never be forgotten, so long as Burkina Faso lives.